Hello, everybody. We are back for another Dark Side of the Ring review. The final one before the season finale next week on Owen Hart. That's going to be quite something to talk about. But this week's episode chronicles possibly the greatest tag team of all time, the Road Warriors, having success pretty much virtually anywhere that they went to go. They would be not hindered, but they would be having tons and tons of championship gold. So, of course, they're going to interview what's called Road Warrior Animal, because Animal was, one half of the tag team champs, one half of the greatest tag teams of all time. The Repo Man, which was little bit out of left blue, and not to mention Paul Ellering, who was the manager of the Road Warriors. They talked about how Hawk was this real tough guy who had like this temper about him, how he could flip out like almost at any second. And Hawk, along with Animal, they grew up in Minnesota, and it was very tough back in the day. And Hawk was known growing up as one of the toughest kids, if not the toughest kid, in Minnesota, and he beat up a lot of kids. He beat them up like almost like it was his hobby to beat up kids, and he would even like punch himself from time to time, just punch, punch, punch. He was a rough and tough kind of kid growing up. So very quickly, they started, Hawk and Animal, they started hanging out with each other, and they were, let's face it, they were very big guys. They were very big guys, and they worked as bouncers at a bar. And the bartender told them that he was thinking about starting a wrestling school because he himself was an old professional wrestler, Eddie Sharkey. And at first, Animal wasn't too 100% sure about it. He was all like, I don't know. But then he's all like, why not? It can't hurt. And so that's how they got introduced into the wrestling business. Very quickly, Animal was recruited by Ole Anderson. And Hawk, he started to work over in Canada, so the two were split away. And Animal himself was known as he was originally called the Road Warrior. He had the gimmick of the Road Warrior. And, they worked, but both Animal and Hawk were having financial troubles, especially with the fact that Animal had just recently got married, he had a family, and Hawk didn't like where he was working, so they decided that they would come back to Minnesota. And the story of how they got how they came to be a team goes like this. Eddie Sharkey, because one day Ole comes into the bar that Eddie Sharkey is working at. Eddie Sharkey showed Ole Anderson a picture of Hawk, and Anderson naturally thought that it was Animal. And Eddie Sharkey was like, no, that's Hawk. And the reaction that they got, that Ole Anderson said, was, wait, there's two of these guys. And immediately he wanted both Hawk and Animal to come in as a tag team. And said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So he went with the name the Road Warriors. And they started to work in Georgia Championship Wrestling. And they were working like along names, like big established names like Sergeant Slaughter and Dusty Rhodes, and now they were on this grand big scale after only wrestling for not that long, especially as a tag team. Literally, this was their first outing as a tag team. And when they went to the station, they went to the TV station, they were immediately handed the belts. And they were told that because Hawk, oh no, my bad, Animal asked, where do we say we got the belts? Where do we say we won it from? I say, just, say you won it in a tournament in Chicago. much like how Pat Patterson won the Intercontinental title in an imaginary tournament in Rio de Janeiro, but both of those tournaments never existed. So immediately they were given the tag team belts. You know, like so they also needed something else, and Paul Ellering would be thrown in as their manager to help take them to the top. So at first they were like this leather, like this everything clad. They were just clad in leather, wearing leather all over the place. Where Oli got the idea after watching Mad Max, hey, well, let's paint your face. Let's paint your guys' face. And so they were start painting it, and they came up with all these different ideas. And Hawk had the idea for Animal to shave his head into a mohawk, and for himself to shave his head into a double mohawk, and that way when they bend over and they put their heads together, it would look as though they were just like one big unit working, like that's how connected they were. Animal had the idea to put these spikes on the shoulder pads, and they were quickly, like everything was falling into place, and they were they were getting a name for themselves, running all over the competition, working all over the world. And the Road Warriors would end up having a huge amount of success in Japan. And the fans over there, they loved them because of they were very hard hitting, team. And, Japanese fans and, us fans of New Japan Pro Wrestling, we like when wrestling is stiff and when it's done hard. When it looks real, it looks amazing. And Road Warriors, they knew that, so they took advantage of that, and they're very stiff workers themselves. Is at this point in the documentary they talk about how Hawk would like to hang out, and he would drink, and he would even drink with members of the Yakuza. And it's at this point that we start to see how the habits of Hawk drinking and partying with very little rest slowly but surely start to affect the team. And slowly and surely, the Road Warriors, they kept on getting bigger and bigger with each match that they worked. They wrestled all over the place. They were never tied to one company. They went all over the place, to Canada, to the United States. They went to Japan. They went all over the place, making a big, huge name for themselves. And Jim Crockett Promotions, what would eventually be known as WCW, and good old Dusty Rhodes, had an idea. He tells the Road Warriors about a scaffold match. An idea for a scaffold match, which was like one of the very first scaffold matches. And Hawk had broken a small bone on the bottom of his leg while wrestling a match in Tokyo. But he would continue on in the match, just showed like the fighting spirit that Hawk had, and he knew that the show had to go on because all these people had paid money to see the Road Warriors in this match. And they ask, when did Animal start knowing the signs of Hawk starting to have a little bit of a problem that he couldn't control? And he said it was before their first WWE run. Now, they talk about this, and they make this a point that it sort of seemed that Animal was bothered by Hawk's drug use, and how could you not be, especially when he's your tag team partner, because you two have to work with each other, and you have to make sure that, you guys take care of each other inside and outside the ring. And how can you take care of him outside when he is drinking constantly and doing coke constantly? Because, like I said, back in time, wrestlers were doing coke all over the place. So it's like, what can you do without him, getting angry and walking away? So finally, they get to their first WWE run. And this was, you know, Road Warriors saw this as a sign that, you know, like this is the big boys, you know, the big company, like they are marketing themselves as the big company, so this is where we naturally need to go. So at the time, Vince had already had two people in the company who were branded with the name Warrior in their name, the Ultimate Warrior and the Modern Day Warrior, Kerry Von Erich. So he wanted a name change, so there weren't like a lot of warriors, and they came up with the name Legion of Doom, and Vince instantly loved it, and that's how they came up with the name Legion of Doom. Because like, and I would assume that they wouldn't be thrilled to change the name, but Legion of Doom, like, you know, that sounds pretty badass. Sounds pretty badass. And they talked about how they got the idea from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. He's like, meanwhile, in the Legion of Doom. And that's where they got the idea for the tag team name, the Legion of Doom. And at this point, they talk about the grueling schedule that, you know, because they were used to being busy, but they were not used to WWE's, you know, massive schedule. And they say, you know, you get very little time off, and, you know, you can be in this cycle where you get injured and you're in so much pain that you can barely sleep, and then you also have to train, and then you have to perform while still being injured. So you have like no resort but to start medicating yourself and start taking these pain pills to numb the pain, and then you start drinking, and then all of a sudden it becomes this big cycle, you know, of abuse, really. And it's sad when this happens, because it's like they aren't given any sort of like other option but to do this, you know. There have been some cases of wrestlers who lived like happy and they never did drugs and stuff like that, but, you know, it's obviously that the pain and the drugs are meant to help you as you're, you know, as you're in so much pain. One interview that I did not expect to for them to one person I didn't expect for them to interview was the Godfather. And they talk about how they went into this club, this titty bar, and how Vince, for some reason, he just, and I believe this because Vince is crazy. I did a whole video about this guy. This dude's crazy. About how in the middle of this club, he wanted to take everyone's finish. And the Road Warriors proceeded to do, you know, their doomsday finish on Vince McMahon in the middle of this club. The most randomest thing in the world. But if you know Vince McMahon, if you've heard the stories of Vince McMahon, you know it's not that far-fetched. And at this point, they're starting to get bigger and bigger, and they're starting to do bigger shows like pay-per-views. And as they're doing bigger pay-per-views, Hawk starts doing more cocaine. Until finally, his problem starts to affect Animal as well. At SummerSlam in Wembley Stadium. And before the show, Vince is telling them what they're going to do during the match. And Vince gets noticeably pissed off, because every time Vince tries to talk, Hawk would constantly interrupt him. And you could just tell that he was incredibly high and inebriated. And Vince, obviously, he would be very, very fucking pissed. I think any of us in this situation would be very, very pissed. And apparently he had taken Placidyls, and he had taken them the night prior for 6 hours. Taking them again today on the day of one of their biggest shows, and Wembley Stadium, one of their biggest draws. So Hawk is incredibly inebriated, and they still have to ride motorcycles to the ring. They have to ride them all the way to the ring. And they were supposed to be in the semi-main event of that card. But they ended up being dropped down to one of the opening matches of the card. And you can see why they did that, first of all, to punish them. Second of all, because you don't want one of your biggest matches of the night to be a dud, especially with someone who is very inebriated. So as soon as they get in the ring, Animal, he knows that Hawk shouldn't be anywhere near this ring. He should not even be, like, he should just be gone. But you can't cancel the match last minute. You can't cancel it. So they start performing, and DiBiase and RS, they want to do the Doomsday finish. But Animal tells him there's no way that he can do it. Hawk can barely stand up. He's gonna fall off the top rope. And so they had to change the finish. It was just a power slam finish, and they show footage from the match, and it just looks really bad. You can see Hawk just like he's stumbling around, and he has no idea where he is. He has no idea where to go. Like, it's just awkward to see, and it's a little sad to see, because like here's like these great tag team wrestlers, and one of them, who's a great technician, all of a sudden he has no idea where to go. He's just lost. He's inebriated, but he's lost. And Animal was naturally pissed, because now this is infecting. Yeah, no, it is. It's infecting his career. The drugs and Animal, no, my bad, and Hawk showing up inebriated, which is something that should never happen before a match, because you're placing your body in someone else's hands potentially. It's affecting now Animal, and he was pissed. So after SummerSlam, Animal went to Pennsylvania by himself. He didn't want to be anywhere near Hawk, so he flew by himself to do some. They had to do TV stuff, and they get there. Paul Ellering is there, but Hawk is nowhere to be found, and apparently he didn't even get on the plane to come back home. So Hawk, at this point, called Vince's secretary, and he just said, "I quit." And like, wow, that's like, thanks for the heads up, you dickhead. Like, that was very, like, unprofessional of him. But he was like, what can you expect? The dude was doing coke and alcohol all at the same time. And Animal knew that they were gonna leave WWE, because this just wasn't gonna fly. So Animal, he wanted to do his final dates. He's just like, hey, he wanted to do his final dates with Hawk, and he said, hey, let's just do these dates, so we can leave on good terms. So if they ever want us back, we can be able to come back. But Hawk, he didn't want to do that. He's just all like, no, I don't want to do that. And he made a deal to work in Japan, and he worked with Kensuke Sasaki as the new incarnation of the Road Warriors. You know, and Kensuke Sasaki did a hell of a video on that guy. I just want to plug in the old video, if you haven't seen it, how Kensuke Sasaki killed a New Japan trainee, and maybe they should do that for an episode of Dark Side of the Ring, because that is something else. But I don't want to talk too much about that. So Animal, at this point, he is pissed because Hawk has essentially replaced him, and doing their original gimmick. And Animal's like, he's like, why would you do that? He's like, I'm over here, I'm by myself, I'm not even doing that. Like, I never found someone to replace you. And so he was really pissed about that. Animal, eventually, he got injured, and, Animal was sort of like almost the person who could keep Hawk in check. And now that Animal was gone, Hawk was doing more and more and more drugs. He was rushed 3 separate times to the ER for overdosing on drugs, and he said that Hawk himself had a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler, and his pickup truck rolled over 6 times, and he had no seatbelt on, and he walked away fine from it. That is just beyond me. That is just beyond me as how he survived that. The WWE eventually they did want the Road Warriors back in 1997. So they brought them back, but they had this insurance policy in place making sure that they make each and every one of their matches. And they also had a caveat in the fact that there would be a new member of the group, Draws. And they had a talk with Vince McMahon. And Vince wanted to make Hawk's drug and alcohol problems an angle on TV. And they would run with it for a couple of weeks, but Animal did not like doing the angle because it was hitting too close to home. And also the fans weren't a big, they didn't love it, and they once again would leave WWE. Animal and Hawk at this point, they went to start wrestling in Australia and during a tour when Hawk, and this is crazy, but if you have heard anything that I've been saying, Hawk is known for doing crazy things. Hawk, along with a couple of the other wrestlers, was doing coke and muscle relaxers. He was doing both of them simultaneously, and he was doing them for 2 days straight. He was up for 2 days straight doing coke and muscle relaxers with no sleep at all, 2 days straight. And he's supposed to be working an event. Animal, at the day of the event, goes near the entrance area because he sees a group of people that are huddled up. They're gathered, and Animal goes to see what's going on. And Hawk is on the floor. The paramedics are tending to him. He's had an episode. They take him to the hospital, and Hawk calls Animal, and he's all like, I need you to get me out of the hospital because I don't want to die here. Oh, yeah. So, Animal goes, he checks He checks Hawk out of the hospital. They go back home, and essentially he's like, hey, you're on your own now. After this catastrophic near-death experience, he finally is like, I've had enough of this. I don't want to see you die. I don't want this in my... You're on your own. Naturally, that would affect someone that kind of way. So, Animal, after a while, he gets introduced to Christian Power Team. And it was basically this team of people who were like, they were lifting heavy weights, they were breaking things of that and stuff like that. They were just breaking things. Like, it's this big deal. It's this big deal, this Christian Power Team. And Animal had decided that he wanted to bring Hawk into this. And Hawk got so inspired by what was going on that he wanted to give his life to the Lord. He wanted to become a born-again Christian. And he was baptized one of the days that he went to see the Christian Power Team. And this was a huge turning point for Hawk. He was starting over brand new, and he even got married. He got married, and he was, talking to people about his life, and he was starting over fresh. After a guy who's been doing so much drugs and alcohol, like, it's good for him that he was able to start over fresh somewhat. But one day, after moving out of his house in the beach, he was moving the last piece of furniture into the house, and he told his wife that he was going to lay down because he wasn't feeling so well. Later in the day, Animal would get a call saying that Hawk had passed. His heart had just stopped. It was after all the abuse that it had taken over the years. Paul Ellering was, when he heard the news, Paul Ellering had taken out the old van because when they were traveling with each other, they traveled in this van, and he took out the old van and he spray painted it black and he drove it to his funeral. And then they end the documentary talking about his legacy as a wrestler and how he should be remembered as part of one of the best tag teams of all time in the Road Warriors, and that's where it ends. Damn, these are all sad. These are all sad, and I can only shudder what next week's season finale is going to bring us. It's just this story is also really sad. It's really sad because he's just like, it seemed as though he was starting his life over brand new, and as soon as he was doing that, he got his life taken away due to all the all the alcohol and drugs that he did. um, it's just a sad story, man. And at least we can look back on his career, aside from his drunken episodes back when he was working as the original Road Warriors, and look back and say, you know what, Hawk was part of one of the greatest tag teams of all time. And a lot of people, the Road Warriors are the greatest tag team of all time. I mean, they had success nearly everywhere they went, and rarely ever did they lose. They were just such a great and phenomenal tag team, and this was their, unfortunately, their demise. But yeah, man, I don't want to leave it on a sour note. But sometimes that's just how it is. Like, it's just, it was a really good episode. I like this. I like this episode a lot more than the Herb Abrams one, and some of the other ones in this season. But boy, oh boy, next week is gonna be a hard one. Next week is gonna be a hard one to do. Next week is gonna be hard, and I want to see if they cover. Because I know they might mention. They're probably more than likely gonna mention it. I just want to see how they do the falling out of basically the rest of the Hart family and Martha Hart. I want to see how they do that, because that is a very controversial, controversial aspect of the whole entire relationship, is everything with Martha Hart and Bret Hart and the rest of the Hart family. So we're just gonna have to wait and see that. It's gonna be quite the heavy hitter of an episode. So do me a favor, let me know what you guys think about this episode of Dark Side of the Ring, what you thought about the whole entire series so far. Let me know in the comment section below. Make sure you hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Stay safe out there, you guys, and I'll see you all as soon as I can. Goodbye and good night. Bang.